board to order. Donna, would you call the roll for us?
Certainly. Let me bring that up on the screen. Oh. Andy Mefford.
Present.
Andy Mefford's present. Sean McCoy.
Here.
Sean McCoy's present. Dave Loomis.
Here.
Dave Loomis is present. Micah Sewell. He emailed me earlier. He's got a conflict. Jim Bashand.
Present.
Jim Bashand's present. Neva Hassanen. Not in at this time. Toon Pham.
Here.
Toon Pham's present. Josh Schrader.
Here.
Josh Schrader's present. Shane Morrissey.
Present.
Shane Morrissey's present. Vince Caristo is absent. Caroline Lauer.
Present.
Caroline Lauer is present. Madam Chair, there are 6 members and 2 alternates present. Would you like to appoint both alternates as regular voting members tonight?
Yes, please. Thanks.
Thank you.
Oh, and here's Neva. Okay. All right.
Go ahead and record that Neva is present. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Donna. Okay, the next item on the agenda is the approval of the minutes. Would anyone like to add any comments or additions to the minutes or make a motion to adopt them?
I move to adopt the minute.
Move to second.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Aye. Aye.
I'll abstain. I wasn't there.
Same with me.
That seems fair enough. Okay, next item is public comment on items that are not on the agenda. Heather, would you mind putting up the information for how people can call in and I can read that out? Okay, all right. So for those of you listening in, there are 2 ways to attend the webinar and participate in the meeting. You can use the Zoom app, and the link to do so with the passcode is on the screen right now. If you do that, please use the raise hand function and I will call on you and you can make your comment. And then if you'd like to comment by phone, you can use one of the following numbers and the meeting ID, which is on the screen here. And you can press *9 to raise your hand and be recognized for public comment. And then you press *6 to mute and unmute yourself. And when you do make your comment, please identify yourself with your name and your phone number before giving your comments. And then also there is a 30 to 50 second delay. So it might take a while for you to hear us call on you, but we will call on you. And then please mute whatever you are using to listen to the meeting because there will be an echo. So with that, I'll give people a minute to call in and go from there. I'm not seeing any attendees. And staff, that's where I would look if anyone had called in as well. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct, Caroline.
Okay, great. All right, so I'm not seeing any public comment. Not at the moment seeing any attendees, but if anyone on the board was wondering, Bailey wanted me to note that previously on the agenda, there was a public hearing for the Lazy Acres RV Park. And that's not on the agenda, obviously, as you saw in our packets, because of a change in their application due to the sewer decision in Sealy Lake. And so their application timeline has changed, and we don't have a date for when we would see them, but they're moving back in the process. So if there was anyone wondering why that was no longer on the agenda, that's why. And with that, I'll go through the staff announcements. Okay, so as we said last meeting, there is a board training tomorrow night from 6 to 7:30 p.m. I've only heard good things about this training, so if you have the opportunity, it sounds like it would be a great thing, and just make you even better at what you're already good at doing. And then to sign up for that, all the links are in our packet. Second staff announcement was the staff updates memo by Bailey. Pretty clear there. She isn't here tonight since it's a city project, but she did want me to let you all know that if you have any specific questions that you would like her to address in the upcoming meeting, where trying to figure out what date it is. Hold on. On April 20th, she was going to do a staff presentation regarding previous board questions. If you have any other specific questions you'd like for her to address, you can send her an email and she'll make sure to prepare for that. The deadline for her to get that in the agenda is next week. So sooner rather than later is great. And thank you to Bailey, even though she's not here, for putting together that memo. And then finally, the last announcement is that Shane, Mr. Morrissey, has been voted to be a regular voting member, taking my spot effective at the end of tonight's meeting. So thank you, Shane, for stepping into that role, and I'm excited that you'll be a voting member. All right. So with that, those are our staff announcements, and we'll move into the public hearing part of the evening.
Excuse me, Caroline?
Yes.
Caroline, excuse me. I just had a quick question on that. April, I believe that Ms. Pehan was going to come in and present to us on April 20th as well. Is that still happening?
That's correct. So on April 20th, we have the 2103 River Road rezone with Dave DeGrand-Prix from the city, a discussion with Aaron Pehan, and then also the staff presentation with Bailey.
Okay, thank you.
Be a full night.
We're gonna miss you though.
I know, I'll miss you guys too. All right, any other questions on the staff memo? Okay, all right, so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Grant Carlton for a presentation on the public hearing for an amendment to Article 3, Section 080.7, Parks and Open Space Requirements. So Grant, take it away.
Hi, thanks, Caroline. Can you guys hear me okay? Yeah, okay. So yeah, thanks for having me. I am Grant Carlton, the Open Space Program Manager for the City of Missoula Parks and Recreation Department. I'm here tonight to discuss a proposal to amend subdivision regulation, and I wanted to just quickly highlight at the beginning that this is a City of Missoula subdivision regulation as opposed to a county subdivision regulation, just to make sure everybody's on the same page and out there in the public. And so what we're talking about tonight is a proposal to amend section 3080.7. Article 3 is the Missoula subdivision design standard. So this is the section 080.7, which we call the cash in lieu of Parkland Dedication regulation. I'll explain a little bit about what that means, some background and some contextual information in just a second. But I did want to quickly highlight sort of the overall sort of thematic objectives of this proposal. The first one being to resolve the ambiguities arguably existing in the current language, and secondly, to create a more predictable, clear, and expedient process as part of the greater subdivision review process related to this cash in lieu of Parkland Dedication sort of sub-process. And again, I'll provide a little bit more explanation as to what that means and how that fits into the subdivision review process. But this is a Parks and Recreation sort of driven proposal. And I did also want to mention that the desired outcome is a mutually beneficial one that will hopefully provide the development community with, as I said, an efficient and expedient process. We heard from a lot of members of the development community as we go through some of these subdivision reviews, and that's something we heard loud and clear. So we're trying to address that aspect, as well as to help bolster Parks and Rec's ability to meet the sort of community's adopted objective of providing open space and park opportunities in every neighborhood as we grow. And I'll talk a little bit more about that mission and objective in just a second as well. This regulation amendment, I want to say, famous last words, I want to say is sort of straightforward and fairly succinct, and it's intended to be sort of surgical in nature. It's not intended to address all of the systematic, arguably systematic issues. We're hoping to clear up a few things related to just clarity and provide a little bit more clear language, like I said before. And I did also want to mention that City Council will be holding their public hearing this coming Monday, April 12th. So we'll have more opportunity for public comment. I'll talk a little bit about background and context. I can go into public comment, agency review, and then and before I do that, we can look at the actual proposal on the table. We can pull up the language, and if necessary, I can talk about how this proposal sort of squarely fits the intent and purposes of the actual subdivision regulations themselves. So a bit about sort of the background and how we got here. I would say the impetus for parks and open space requirements being even a part of the subdivision review process sort of started back in 2004 as the city navigated the master parks and recreation planning process. At that point, it became, if it wasn't already, it became even more abundantly clear that Missoulians really value and desire parkland and open space opportunities, and they value those opportunities in close proximity to their homes and neighborhoods. And so this open space system and the livability, walkability that it can help provide really is sort of what makes Missoula Missoula in a way, or at least adds to that sense of place. So and also to touch on this quickly, you guys are probably intimately familiar with the planning efforts ongoing in the Mullen area. This has been further emphasized throughout that process. And so due to that sort of public interest and expressed importance of parks and open space and just the system in general, these sort of requirements that we're going to talk about were incorporated into the city's subdivision review process back around 2004. So talking about the subdivision review process, this is a bit of an oversimplification, but with some exceptions, typically the typical subdivision review process requires either a dedication of parkland as part of a subdivision, or a city approved alternative, which could be cash in lieu of parkland dedication, or a combination of both parkland and cash in lieu. And that decision is sort of based on a number of different factors, and City Council, in consultation with Park Board, Planning Board, city staff, determines how that shakes out. So this request specifically speaks to those scenarios in which it's been decided that cash in lieu of parkland dedication is the direction that we're going and what we're going to require. So we're not going to be talking about if there's an instance in which parkland dedication is required. So fundamentally speaking, when a subdivision application is submitted, one of the city's objectives is to provide an open space opportunity or park or trail connectivity. It can take the shape of a number of different ways, but either directly adjacent to that proposed development or in close proximity to that proposed development. So this is consistent with our sort of objective of keeping pace with growth and sort of providing these opportunities where growth occurs. And so again, one of the sort of enumerated missions of Parks and Rec and the city is to deliver one of these opportunities: park, trail, open space, natural area, within a short walk of every neighborhood. This is in the 2019 Missoula Urban Area Open Space Plan, as well as the 2004 Parks and Recreation Master Plan. So we see this objective in a number of different places, and it serves as a primary component of the I would say the vision of a growing Missoula, and we certainly are growing. And so I would say it certainly contributes to helping sort of shape our community's character, and reinforcing those things that are important to our community. So due to sort of relatively, rapidly increasing land values and other sort of market-driven factors, we've seen a pretty remarkable increase in subdivision applications over the last couple of years. And like I said before, there are a number of different factors that sort of dictate the city's decision of whether or not to require, parkland dedication itself or cash in lieu thereof. But one of those factors, as an example, is size. So when we've got a relatively small development proposal, and typically for a typical subdivision, 11% of the area is what would be required for, with some exceptions, is what would be required for parkland dedication itself. So when we're talking about, an acre or a couple acre parcel, it doesn't always make sense for us to require, that subdivision to set aside a piece of land. So what we do is we require cash in lieu of that parkland dedication. And so what that allows us to do is then pull funds from other sort of nearby, similarly sized or, similar character proposed subdivisions. We pull those funds together and we can tap into those funds to help invest in open space amenities and opportunities in the immediate vicinity. So going into sort of the current language, the idea is that a cash donation in lieu of parkland dedication must be equal to the fair market value of the land that would have been required to be dedicated. So I mentioned usually it's about 11% of a proposed subdivision. So what we're talking about is an appraisal that shows that what we're requiring as cash in lieu donation matches the value of that land that would have otherwise been required to be dedicated. So the underlying intent of this language as it stands is to provide the city of Missoula with sufficient funds to literally compete in the open market, oftentimes to purchase parkland in the vicinity of these proposed subdivisions, or otherwise invest in sort of increasing the capacity of parks and other open space areas that are already there, if that makes sense. So, and again, the goals that are laid out here are to keep up with the pace of growth, and to also keep up with the geographic location of where that growth occurs. And so this cash in lieu calculation and the funds that stem from that is really one of the only tools and is really a substantial funding source that allows the city the ability to keep up with these rising land values and do just what I just mentioned, to keep up with the pace of growth. And so as a prerequisite to calculating the amount, the cash in lieu donation amount, the current subdivision regulation language requires that a subdivider demonstrate the fair market value of, and we can look at the language in just a moment, but that a subdivider demonstrate the fair market value of the unsubdivided, unimproved property being developed by submitting an appraisal report. And that's not changing here. We do create a new sort of additional way to demonstrate fair market value, but we're still going to require that. And so in essence, we're not creating a new requirement. I did want to highlight that. The language also intends that the appraisal should sort of incorporate the zoning designation that will apply to the final approval plat. And so basically once this appraisal is approved, once the appraisal is received by the city staff conducts cash in lieu calculations based on this submitted appraisal. So that's sort of generally how it works. So recently the city has experienced several instances in which an appraisal that is submitted pursuant to this language by a potential subdivider. We've sort of experienced some various challenges, most of which I would say are related to the demonstration of fair market value, whether it be the timing of the zoning or some ambiguities in the language. And one such example would be, I think is actually a direct result of ambiguities in the language. So that's one thing we can talk about in just a moment when we look at the language. This proposal seeks to clear that up. And these, what I call on the ground valuation issues, have really created tangible impediments to carrying out the objectives that I just mentioned of the city to provide these open space and park opportunities. It's also created tension between the city and the development community. We've seen like I said, we've heard some challenges related to expediency and clarity and predictability in the process. It's it's created significant expenditure of city staff and leadership's time as well as developers. And so we're hoping to sort of clear all that up, at least, again, this is meant to be surgical in nature. Like I said, we're not attempting to address all of the systematic issues related to park and open space requirements. We will be taking a sort of a broader look at that. And I wanted to mention, and I've got Laval Means here from the city who can also speak a little bit more to this if there's any further questions, but the city is currently undergoing a workflow planning process that is taking a hard sort of broader look at our subdivision and townhome exempt development regulations. And so that process is sort of ongoing. The timeline for completing that workflow process is a bit unknown at this point. But I did want to mention that we're initiating sort of a broader regulatory amendment analysis, and some changes could come out of that. So I did want to highlight that, and we can answer questions related to that if you guys have any. I wanted to we can pull up the actual language here in just a moment. Let me see if I can actually do that now. Thanks for bearing with me. I know I'm throwing a lot at you guys. Sorry, I'm just having a bit of a lag here.
Grant, if you have any difficulties, this is Heather. I can get that language up on the screen for you.
Oh, great. I think, are you guys seeing that?
Yes, yeah, it just came up for us.
Yeah, and I don't know if I know you guys had this in your pack, and I don't know if it makes sense to pull up the clean language or the red line version. I'm gonna start here with the red line version. So I just, again, this is it's pretty simple and straightforward. I wanted to point your attention here to this language. So obviously the red underline is what I've added, and the stripe through language here is what we're deleting. The timing issue or the ambiguity I mentioned just a moment ago stemmed from this language. So what we're saying now, that the ultimate product here is basically saying that we will look at the zoning designation that will apply to the proposed subdivision at the time the final plat is submitted for approval. Clears up that ambiguity. Before it mentioned that the existing zoning, if the subdivision application is not accompanied by a rezoning request. And I think that there was some wordsmithing issues there that created some ambiguities. And I think what we've added here is basically we didn't change the underlying intent. We didn't create any new requirements. It's just made a little bit more clear that we're going to look at the zoning at the time the plat is submitted to the city for approval. Pretty straightforward there. And then here before basically the next big distinction is before we required that a subdivider submit a qualified appraisal report that's completed by a certified general real estate appraiser. That's still there. The distinction now is that instead of the subdivider going out and hiring and choosing that appraiser, we are making it to where the city will choose and hire the appraiser, but the developer will still be responsible for that for that appraisal fee, which they were in the past. So again, the only distinction is that instead of the subdivider choosing and hiring the appraiser, the city now does that. There's a couple of sort of reasons behind that related to efficiency and consistency. The idea there is that the city would would sort of retain under professional contract a small pool of appraisers. We would be working with the same sort of small handful of appraisers. The reports would be consistent. We'd be used to seeing the structure. We'd be able to, clearly communicate our expectations related to timing and what we expected to see in the data. And so I think we'd have a lot of sort of time and just, capacity savings there. That's the idea. And the second thing here I wanted to point to is this is subsection B. This did not exist before. This is a new sort of carve out that, or it's an additional way that a subdivider can demonstrate fair market value. that did not exist before. So we're allowing a bit of additional flexibility that could save a subdivider some time and money. If the property was purchased within a year, a subdivider can demonstrate fair market value by showing an agreement or other executed contract that has the purchase price, and thus avoid commissioning an appraisal report. So again, that's something that we added that allows a little bit more flexibility, potentially some cost savings. Down here, we're just striking this language. There's a requirement that this appraisal be prepared within 6 months. That's added back up to subsection A. And these other two were just distinctions that we felt were unnecessary, and they're captured here already. So basically, it's nice and clean. To demonstrate fair market value, you have two options, whereas before you only had one. The only other big distinction is that instead of the subdivider choosing the appraiser, that will now be borne by the city. And I think that's sort of the gist of the language. And I can pull this up in just a second. I'm just going to check my notes really quickly. And I wanted to touch on, I wanted to touch on public comment. We did not get a single comment either through Engage Missoula or directly to me. I personally think that's a product of this being just fairly straightforward and honestly cleaning up some ambiguities, like I said. I am glad to go through and explain how this proposed amendment fits squarely within the purposes and intent of Missoula subdivision regulations. If need be, that was included in section 5 of your packet, if you guys would like. But other than that, I think I can pull up that language again, and I will take questions.
Thank you, Grant. Yeah, I think if board members have questions about how it fits into that larger process, we can raise those when we come to the question section. But first, we will take public comment on this hearing item. Heather, would you mind putting that language back up? Grant, we'll have to take yours down to give the public the instructions on how to call in, if that's okay.
Sure. Yep.
Thanks. Thank you, Heather. Okay, so again, there are two ways to attend this webinar and participate in the meeting. You can use the Zoom app with the instructions here. And if you do so, please use the raise hand function to let us know that you would like to speak. You can also call in by phone using one of the numbers listed on the screen and the meeting ID. If you do that, please use *9 to raise your hand to be recognized for public comment, and then you can use *6 to mute and unmute. I'll identify you by your name or phone number and invite you to comment. Please identify yourself by name before giving your comments. And then one final note is there is a bit of an audio delay. And so if you're commenting, please mute your TV or computer, whatever you're listening to the meeting on. If you don't, there will be an echo with the live stream. So with that, I will open it up to public comment. Give people another minute to call in if they'd like. Okay, seeing no attendees in the Zoom meeting, I will close public comment and give board members an opportunity to ask Grant any questions that came up during his presentation. Jim?
Thanks, Caroline. Grant, notice what's the nuance difference between proposed language of just saying city versus city council, if any?
Well, let me pull up the language and maybe we can look at it together. Let's see. Is it
red line, previous language said provided to city council, and now that looks like it just goes to you guys for approval?
Yeah, I don't think that there was meant to be any distinction there. I think that doesn't change anything. Are you talking about up in the first paragraph? I'm sorry, I'm not tracking exactly.
Yep, you're good. Yes.
Yeah, there was no intention behind that. I think it was just generally submitted to the city. The process isn't going to change. It will be reviewed by city staff, and then if there's any questions, we take it up to council or planning board or park board, depending on the situation.
Okay, thank you. Shane, I see your hands raised.
Yeah, I just have I guess maybe just a general question on the paragraph B here. Well, I guess who chooses which option they're going with? Is that the applicant themselves? They get to choose A or B?
Yeah, that's the intent. Either one will suffice as a demonstration of fair market value. If the scenario that that subsection B lays out is there, then the subdivider has that option, and we'll hopefully save on the appraisal fees.
I guess, is there any concern that B will not actually establish a fair market value in an instance where a piece of land is sold to a relative or something like that and is not establishing a fair market value? Or, I'm just trying to dream up a loophole scenario in which there's a transfer of land for $1, for instance, and it does not establish a fair market value, and then you guys are hamstrung by that in some way.
Sure. Yeah, I think that's a good question. I mean, the intent here is that it's an arm's length transaction, and I think that would be part of the analysis, and that's why we mentioned specifically like a buy sell. I think that that's a great question. I think that the intention is that the city would have the ability to look at this and say, that's why we sort of mentioned the executed contract. If it doesn't pass the smell test, I do think the city has the ability to challenge that. It's not explicitly written here, but that's something that I can certainly I can chew on that. That's a good point.
Great. Dave, I see your hands raised.
So thank you. I want to say before I ask my question that I think Parks has done a really great job over the years providing a variety of opportunities in town and massive quantities of open space, and which leads me to my question about how do you maintain and operate in maintenance. So my question has to do about, and the in lieu fees, are they, when you collect them, are they allowed at all through state law or local ordinance to use for operating and maintenance? Because I see that as a huge shortfall in the near future about operating our system here.
Yeah, are you sorry, I think you broke up a little bit. Are you speaking directly to the cash in lieu fees?
I am speaking directly to that. Can it be used for operating and maintenance on our major system here? I know for a fact, and you do too, that there's a lot of work to be done in this system. And if you have to go do it only through budgeting purposes, I think we'll be getting behind. If we're able to use some of this, maybe a third or a half, for instance, of cash in lieu fees to support the operation and maintenance of the actual system? That's my question.
Yes, yes, that's a great question. And the answer is yes, we are. We do have the ability to use, I believe it's 50% for operation and maintenance costs. It still has to be in the immediate vicinity, I think within a half mile of the proposed development. We still have those geographic constraints, but we can use a portion of that for operation and maintenance, yes.
Okay.
On the ground, yes, maintenance activities and improvements, things like that, yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Neva, I saw your hand go up and then went down. And did you have a question? And maybe you took a step away from your computer. We'll give Neva a minute to come back. I had a quick question, Grant.
Sure.
Neva, do you mind if I?
Please go ahead. I had to take a quick bathroom break.
No problem. So my question was about how quickly are you using those cash in lieu fees to make purchases? And do you feel like property values, land values are increasing at a rate in which you can't keep up? The Parks and Rec, maybe they have to wait 2 years post the cash in lieu, and it's challenging for you to compete on the open market.
I think that's a tough one to answer. I think it's all over the board. And I don't have a long frame of reference. I've been with the city under a year and a half. So I can't really speak to the past, and maybe we have Mary McRae and Laval Means on the call. Maybe they can speak to more of some, in the previous 2 years or before 2 years. But I would say that as long as the system is operating like it should, and we are sort of collecting the appropriate amounts of cash in lieu, I believe that sets us up well to keep up with the rising land values, because it's, we're getting those checks prior to a plat being finalized. And so we have that money in hand, and how and when it's spent is sort of, site dependent. Sometimes, like I said, we're increasing the capacity of existing opportunities. Other times we're actually going out and purchasing land. It just really depends. But I think that maybe this answers your question, I hope, at least moving forward. If the system is set up well and we are seeing actual appraisals that are based on sort of defensible data and comparable sales like they should be, then we are well set up for success.
Okay, thank you. That does help. Okay, so Neva and then Andy.
Okay, thanks. Mine follows up on that, because so when was the last time that the city actually purchased land using cash in lieu?
That's a great question. And I do not have the answer to that.
Has it ever? So the reason I'm not trying to pick on you or anything, but I just my understanding from the people who have had your position in the past, Grant, is that the cash in lieu ends up basically not amounting to enough money to actually ever purchase parkland. And so I guess I really want to know, where is it going? And it's maybe, do you guys do you know?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, again, going back to the system working, which again, we're taking a look at in a broader sense. I think that what we've seen in the past, and part of the sort of the catalyst for this proposal, is that we didn't have clear requirements for appraisals, and this is not necessarily the fault of anybody else, of anybody. It's just we haven't sort of recouped the cash from these cash in lieu amounts like we probably should have, at least arguably. And so that's one component of it. This seeks to hopefully rectify that a bit.
It seems like, I'm sorry, just to clarify that before you go on, because it seems like what you're really proposing here is, well, who hires the appraiser is the big difference. So how does that change what you just said, in terms of actually buying land with the cash in lieu funds?
Well, I think that I wouldn't say that that is necessarily the big sea change. I think the devil's in the details there, if you will. So
Well, that's
when
what
I said,
I'm wondering. Yeah.
so the original proposal here, I don't want to go too much into it because it's not the proposal, but it included some sideboards on comparable sales and things like that, that would have trickled and flowed down to the appraiser itself. We then took a look, and a lot of people have contributed to this language, and it was whittled down and increased here and there. But what we decided was that the city, when I said we can sort of lay out our requirements, we can, when we contract directly with an appraiser, again, it creates consistency and efficiency, but it also allows us to let them know what we expect from comparable sales and data that they may use to sort of formulate these appraisal reports. And at least there's some consistency. Again, this is not a silver bullet, and that's why I did want to mention we're taking a broader look. I think, again, we are also, this is also a product of a lot of small scale developments going on, and that is something we can't control, at least right now. And so when we're seeing, let's say the Mullen area, there's a lot of small developments in my hypothetical. All of those, if they were in a certain area, all those funds, cash in lieu, would be accumulated into a pool. And hopefully, if the data was there to back up and create the right amount, we could then go out and compete on the open market. That's the idea. And that's what we're hoping this will achieve, or at least start moving in the right direction of achieving.
Well, okay, sorry, but I guess the key thing here in my mind is this working as a subdivision mitigation? Because we just had a subdivision here a couple weeks ago or a month ago, whatever, McNett, where your office said it was okay that they rely on the neighboring subdivision's park and put in a linear park that really was pretty meaningless. So I guess I'm fine with your proposal. I have no problem with it, but the emphasis here is like on how fast can people get through the process. I have not seen one subdivision around here that's really ever been slowed down by a park thing. And 99% of the time, it's just cash in lieu and it just disappears. And so anyway, I'm fine with the proposal, but I think this process is not working. The developers are taking advantage of it, trying to, take credit for neighboring subdivisions like last time is ridiculous. So, I don't really see the cash in lieu program achieving our parkland goals. And so it's frustrating to me to have you come in here and say, well, we've got to be able to, respond more quickly to these subdivision proposals, as if the Parkland dedication is slowing it down. That just is impossible in my mind. That's a big onerous thing here. So I'm really questioning the priorities around this, and I'm happy to vote for this or whatever, but it just seems like a really kind of, in the scheme of things, development is not paying its way in terms of parkland.
Madam Chair, are we still in the question period?
Yes, yeah.
I'm sorry.
We can move we can discuss later. Grant, did you want to respond? If not, I'll go to Andy and then Jim.
I just wanted to mention that, one, that money doesn't just go into the ether, right? It's still there for us to use and spend. And Neva, thanks for your comments. And I do want to sort of like rebut the fact that, our main priority is to, make it a faster process for developers. My primary priority is to help Parks and Recreation in the city carry out its mission. I also, like I said, I do think that there is a mutual beneficial outcome that will be manifested if we can do that. That will, if we can create consistency and efficiency, that will also make the process clearer, and and that also frees up the time of other city staff like Mary and Laval. And so, I hope it's not perceived as just catering to developers' needs, because we're also my job is to cater to the public's needs, and that's what I care about. And if the development community wins as well, that's a bonus.
I agree. I wasn't saying you were catering to developers' needs, except in the sense of your priorities as a department. Can I ask a question though, before we stop? Can we take the share screen off so people can at least see each other? Because otherwise you can't, at least I can't. Thank you.
Sure.
Okay. All right. Great. Thanks for that. Lots more to discuss. Okay. So Andy and then Jim. Oh, Andy, you're muted.
Sorry. So I heard what Neva was saying, and I think that's a step back from the specific bullet of 0.7 and how we calculate the value. I conversely have several concerns about the proposal on the table, and some of them I've heard earlier discussed. I guess I stepped back and I heard Grant introduce this as this was a point to provide efficiency, resolve ambiguities, clearer process, streamlined, efficiency. I hear these terms all the time. And one of the things was pointed to was this distinction about the zoning, about if it was at the time of the plat filing and if there was a rezone on the table. I think arguably that was in the old language. And if this is a clearer language on that front, so be it. I don't have any specific issue with that. It seems like it's sort of a very slight variation on the whole rezone concept. So that's not the one I have issue with. What I have issue with is the process really hasn't changed with the exception of the additional bullet B. So if we rely on the process as a certified evaluator and a certified real estate appraisal, there's very simple math. The other bullets tell you you get 11%, 2%, 5%. If we're to trust appraisers to do their jobs as independent appraisers, and we haven't changed that through bullet A, why does it matter who hires it? It shouldn't matter. We should be able to take a certified appraisal, look at the bottom line and divide by price per square foot and apply the number. It's simple math. So to me, what we're saying here is really, we don't trust the developer. They're in the developer's pocket and they're persuading an appraisal. So I guess I have the same concept. How am I to believe that this isn't just a role reversal where we've said, no, we want to be in charge as the city and set these values? To me, we haven't changed the arena we're playing in. It's just who's leading the circus. And that is very concerning to me, because I also heard this is about clarity and and getting rid of ambiguities. Well, what I heard is, well, we're going to go create a pool of people, which was one of the concerns I had. We're going to also set sideboards. We're going to tell them how to do their job. We're going to start tinkering with guiding their outcomes. That's very concerning. If these are certified appraisers, we shouldn't be influencing that. They should say, here's a piece of dirt. You do your job, whether it's comps. That's your job, appraiser, to set this. So why has the city got their finger in there saying, let me give you some sideboards and some criteria of how you set these values through our list of certified appraisers? So that concerns me. Shane brought up another point about who picks.
Point of order.
Andy, yeah, sorry. Thanks, Jim. We are just going to go through questions right now for Grant and other staff. And I think these are all really great points to raise in discussion once we have a motion on the table. But I will ask, if you have a question of Grant, please ask. And if not, raise these points in discussion.
So I guess my points of question is there going to be a pool of applicants, of appraisers? Will the developer get to pick from that list? I think it's important about who gets to pick option A or B, and if it's the lesser or the greater amounts of those two. I guess those are my specific questions.
Thank you, Andy. Grant, do you mind taking those?
Sure. Yeah. Thanks, Andy. The language is set up for the developer to not choose. The city would choose the appraiser from a pool of qualified appraisers, and we'll go through our standard RFQ, RFP process to make sure that they're certified. We'll check the licensure, make sure that they're above board with their licenses and their CVs and all the qualifications. The idea there is that these folks are busy, and so we want to make sure that we're moving the process along and not getting stopped up because of calendars. Andy, I agree with you. I think that we're not trying to tell appraisers how to do their job. I do understand your question related to how does this change things. I think what the short story is that what we've seen in the past is some appraisals that have come in, and for a number of different reasons, probably, we've got to dig into the sort of the details, some comps that are 6-7 years old, and we all know how much the market's changed. We're not trying to, I don't think anybody should be dictating the value or telling the appraiser what to do. That is not, I'm not qualified to do that. And I don't think many people at the city are. That's not the idea. The idea is to say, you know, we had a lot of back and forth with developers and the appraiser, and sort of, you know, the appraiser was sort of the middle person, if you will. We're trying to work directly with the appraiser to create, again, consistency and efficiency, so that we're not just going in circles, he said, she said kind of thing. And I do want to be clear, we're not throwing any sort of data or, you know, undue sideboards on how an appraiser does their job. It's more, we know what the market is doing, all of us in this meeting. You know, we know that it's changed, we know that it's evolved, and there are certain things that just don't pass the sniff test. And again, I'm not calling out any certain appraisers, there are reasons for that, but the idea is to address those, you know, certain failures of the sniff test in the past, with more communication.
Thanks, Grant. Jim, would you like to ask your questions?
Thank you. Just one. Grant, earlier when Shane brought up the question of $1 transaction, you said you believe there's language that allows the city to, and don't quote me on your exact words, but to check that, some kind of control there. Can you maybe bring up the document and just show where in the language you believe that would occur? Because the way it's written, I don't believe a developer could come back and say, nope, I'm going option B.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, and you know, quite honestly, I don't know that we sort of anticipated you know, a false sale or a falsified, maybe not a falsified document. I don't know that we've explicitly addressed that. I do think that, you know, the backstop is that council reviews all of these proposals, or has the ability to, and so I think that, you know, if we want to take a look at this and maybe add that it needs to be, you know, arm's length, or put some sideboards on that. I mean, that's why we're going through this process, and that's why we're bringing this proposal to you guys. I think we can certainly talk about that. I don't think, to answer your question, I don't think there's any explicit backstop to that in this language.
Thank you. Do you believe that staff would be willing to consider, prior to going to a motion, I would like to ask a question. Would staff be willing to consider last sentence, first paragraph, starting with satisfactory evidence, and insert after satisfactory evidence of any arm's length agreement or fair market value? I'm putting you on the spot, Grant.
Well, I think, yeah. Perhaps that maybe it's better suited to be in subsection B, the arm's length call out,
because that's where the infraction could occur.
Yeah, because the arm's length portion would not affect subsection A.
And I think if that was something we wanted to proceed with, we could make a motion with that amended language and then discuss.
I'll call it a motion then, if we're ready.
Okay. All right, go ahead, Jim.
I had it up and then it went away.
Sorry, Jim. Tung, you have a question?
Yeah, this is actually related. This is more, I don't know who can answer this, if it's staff or whatever, but like process-wise, I'm just curious what our options are. Because as I see it, Shane raised a very interesting point. And clearly there's going to be some language, you know, this could benefit from being updated, the language being tweaked. Like if we don't tweak the language, or if we aren't able to agree on tweaking the language, then what's the next step? Does that mean that this just proceeds in the process, and we, you know, for example, we could either vote it down or not? Or is it possible to say, you know what, like that's a really good point, we got to stop and resubmit? Like can staff, can Grant say, you know what, good point, I'm going to pull it, or are the wheels already in motion and we have to amend?
I don't know the answer to that, but I would assume it would be the former. I don't think we have to proceed unless you guys are ready. I think, yeah, Laval.
Yeah, Laval, would you mind jumping in?
Hi, everybody. This is Lavelle Means in the planning, community planning section. And I think you have a couple approaches you could take here. You could consider an amendment to the section like Mr. Bashand is looking at. You could craft your amendment with a specific statement. And you could also add to the motion an expression of intent so that Grant could refine it with appropriate language as needed with the city attorney's office or something like that. We often we're able to move forward with an intent statement that comes from you, and then we can refine the language. Often a motion an amendment ends up summarized back to planning board chair, or planning board chair, and you can check on it. This is, the hearing is scheduled to occur next week at the city council. But I think that's the way we've done it sometimes in the past, is either you can be comfortable with a specific amendment. City council is going to look at it again, so they will get the concept. And staff can still have additional internal discussion to make sure that language is the legal exact foundation that we need. And we have another shot at with city council. So really expressing intent is pretty important.
Thank you, Laval. That's very helpful. Sean, I see you have your hand raised.
Thank you. Hey, Grant, do you think you could, and maybe you've already said it, but could you maybe explain more how the city is going to hire the appraisers? Like what departments or who's doing that? And then how is that equitable? Like how does that keep from turning into something where, whoever's doing that hiring is hiring the same 3 appraisers all the time? Like, is there some checks to, your guys is not being favoritism there?
Yeah, I think we it'll be a public process as to how we choose that pool. It'll be, we'll put out a request for qualifications and proposal, most likely, or some combination of their. And so basically any appraiser in the community will be able to submit a request for a bid, if you will, if you want to, talk about like other procurement examples. And so from there, we have certain criteria, and it'll be a product of, we'll look at fee schedules, and, I haven't undergone this process, but we'll look at fee schedules and, calendar and qualifications and all that stuff. And it'll be a very, publicly transparent process, like anything that the city or county does. And then from that, we'll choose our pool, again, based on qualifications. And then from there, like for each project, the way we've envisioned it is that we will, choose appraisers for individual projects that have the capacity and the bandwidth at the time to do that project, and, go from there. And so, because I just know that, having worked with appraisers in the past, they're very busy. And so, there are constraints related to time there. Does that?
For sure. And is there a number for this pool? Like, is there a idea of like ideal number?
I think what we discussed was 3, having 3 appraisers that we can, honestly, I think probably most of us understand that the appraiser pool in Missoula is very small anyway. And so I think, I don't know how it'll shake out when we release this RFP. If we get a wave of appraisers that are interested in being a part of this, then maybe we'll increase that number. I don't know what to anticipate there. But what we discussed was 3, so that we have some sort of alternates if somebody's too busy, but we don't have this massive pool. And again, if there's a wave of folks interested, maybe we increase that just to be equitable, as long as everybody's qualified. And yeah.
Okay, awesome. Thank you.
Sure.
Neva, I see your hand raised. Did you have a question or a point of discussion for later?
A question, actually.
Okay.
Building on that. So Grant, in your response there, I guess I have to actually kind of return to Andy's question, which is, how does that make it more efficient to go through a city process and RFP versus the developers or the project representatives or whatever doing that? I'm sorry, maybe I'm missing something, but I'm not sure how that makes it more efficient when you have to put it out through a public process like that. And then, like, in a way, a person could argue, where does that end, right? Does that, if you apply this principle to what you're saying to other aspects of subdivision review, does then the city have to hire the engineers that review the transportation proposals associated with it? I mean, whatever it is. And so, while I don't really have a huge stake in this one way or the other than I do really want a larger conversation about whether this is really meeting our intent or not. But my question is like, how does that really make it more efficient? And then where does it end in terms of the city taking on more and more of that development process, or at least the review of the consultants or whatever? Thanks.
Sure. I can't speak to the latter as far as, how this might affect other processes and requirements and other plans and pieces of the subdivision review process, but I can speak to the former question, and that is that the distinction is that we will have like I said, we will do an RFQ, RFP process or some combination that will obviously entail, public process, but the idea is that will be an initial outlay of timing capital, right? So once we have that pool developed, at that point, we've got them retained under professional contract. Again, the whole process is transparent. We've chosen our pool of 3 to 5 appraisers. And from there, that's when our time savings occurs, because in the past, what we've had is developers going out and having to choose an appraiser and hire the appraiser. We then get the appraisal and city staff reviews it, and there's back and forth with the developer and the appraiser. People challenge the appraisals, and then we go, bring in the mayor or city leadership, and that just is inefficient all around with communication. And so this, again, the idea is to keep it sort of all in one area where the city goes out and hires, with communication with the developer or the subdivider. And then we have our pool. We're used to seeing their structure. They know sort of, we know their fee schedule, we know the timing, and we choose accordingly there. Does that answer your question? I think in a nutshell, it does take a little bit more initial time outlay, but again, we're saving on the back and forth and the challenging of the appraisal and the bringing in city leadership.
And who pays for the RFP process and your time to interview the various appraisers and contact them? And how does that get compensated for? Is that going to come out of the cash in lieu?
I think we have
Parkland.
I don't anticipate that being a super lengthy or cumbersome process. Staff at the city, and it won't be just me, are well adept at, or well steeped in sort of this procurement process, if you want to call it that. We've got staff that are trained to do that, and we have our forms and our process, and I don't anticipate it being too terribly cumbersome. Or too expensive.
Thanks.
Yeah.
I appreciate that. Thank you, Grant. And I really am, last thing I'll say is I am really looking forward to a report on where these cash in lieu fees have actually gone for the last 50 years. Okay, I'll take the last 20, but where do they go? Because I don't know where there's anywhere there's a new park as a result of this. I can't think of one new park that came from cash in lieu money, not one.
Okay, Neva, thanks. So
I'm done, sorry.
Okay, that's okay. All right, so I think we've been hitting on the same point in our last couple of questions. If anyone else has a question that's sort of on a different track, please raise your hand and you can ask it now. If not, I'll entertain a motion for discussion, and then we can continue this discussion. Okay, seeing no hands raised for questions, would someone like to make a motion? Jim?
Yeah, I so move recommend that the Missoula City Council adopt a resolution to amend Article 3, Section 080.7 of the existing subdivision design standards, Missoula City subdivision regulations to reflect proposed language as set forth in the attached Exhibit A proposed amendment language, conditional upon a staff review to ensure all agreements are at arm's length.
I'll second the motion.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Anyone would like to offer some discussion on the motion?
I just have a question. What is arm's length? Where is it defined in the code?
Great question. I think arm's length is a generally accepted term that would address a dollar sale.
Staff, do you feel like that language is sufficiently clear for this motion of intent or expression of intent? The phrase arm's length.
Yeah, and I think
Okay.
that gives me the latitude to go out and sort of wordsmith accordingly if need be. But yeah, that is a legal term of art.
Okay, great. All right, I'm seeing Andy's hand raised. Andy, would you like to offer some discussion points?
Sure. I wouldn't be in support of that motion without a lot of changes to it. One, I think there needs to be clarity, and that's what the point of this document was, to clarify. Supposedly, it doesn't clarify who picks option A or B. Is not clarified in this document. It's not stated. It doesn't state if it's the lower or the higher value of A or B. That's not stated. That's not clear. And I'm not an advocate of having the city hire it. I think it should stay as the developer hired, as it's always been done. There's a process identified as a certified evaluator, and it's a simple process. If it's a certified independent evaluator, it's $1 per square foot in its division. It's simple math. So I don't think this concept of speaking to efficiency is anything in order, because anytime anything's involving the city, it's never efficient. This way, the developer controls their outcomes. They hire their appraiser, they pay the appraiser. City will create a checklist involved with it. It goes on and on and on with the city. So that does not make anything more efficient for the developer. If it's the developer's job to get a price on fair market value as defined by a certified evaluator or appraiser, then so be it. Divide the price and use it. What's been going on in the back and forth has been the city's not been satisfied with those appraisals. And so they're getting in the appraisal business. So I'm not in support of it for major issues.
That was helpful. Thank you.
Jim, I see your hands raised.
Yeah, I would just, I'm in support of this because I believe that it is more fair for the overall transaction for the city to do the appraisal than the developer. I think the perception of objectivity and the reality of objectivity may occur stronger on the city side than on the developer side. I think the city has a defined process for RFPs. I don't think the process that they're going to run an appraiser through is something new. I think that's out there. So I think the objectivity lies with the city. Andy, to your point about how do you choose A and B? Maybe we entertain a second amendment to address that. Because you're right, I don't see in the language anywhere that it clearly states that that's choice of the developer versus choice of the city.
Matt, can I speak to that is that okay?
Yes, yeah.
So the idea is that it's read as a conjunctive A and B, if you will. So that means basically, it says basically satisfactory evidence of fair market value can be demonstrated by either of the following. And so it's inherent in that language, at least from a legal aspect, that a person submitting the report, either the executed buy sell at arm's length, or the city agreeing to go commission an appraisal report, that that was a decision that was made. So basically, Andy, to your question, a developer would have this option if they want to, show us a buy sell that's legitimate and arm's length, and also commission an appraisal that they would have to pay for. They can do that, and according to this language, they can choose either one of them as long as they meet the language. From a legal standpoint, it reads like either one of these can suffice as demonstration of fair market value, and that's the way it was drafted. But if that doesn't flow logically to the people reading it, then we can certainly take a look at it.
Jim, does that answer your question or point of discussion on that? Okay. And then Dave, I saw your hand up and then taken down. Was your point addressed in that? Okay, great. Josh, I see your hand.
Sure. I guess while I'm somewhat concerned about maybe how efficient the city can be in the process, I do concur with Jim that the city selecting the appraiser, if it's based upon transparent criteria, and managing that appraisal process will probably lead to higher valuations for the city. I mean, every appraisal I've ever been a part of has been a negotiation, and it very, oftentimes very heated. And whoever hires the appraiser and provides them with the best inputs generally is able to influence the outcome to a fairly large extent. And so if the objective is to maximize the value for the city under, fair market value is a spectrum. It's not a number. I think it's important to keep that in mind. And I mean, during the financial crisis, reputable independent appraisers, licensed, C.B. Richard Ellis, many others, were putting out complete garbage. And so I just think it's important to keep that in mind. Although I do share Andy's concerns about maybe how quickly the process or how efficiently it could be administered. I'll be supporting the motion.
Thanks, Josh. Neva, I see your hands up.
I have a question for Josh. Josh, so what do you think about this in relationship to all the other review criteria that we have to look at, right? And in other words, if in the context of parks, the city takes on appraisal, how does that sort of translate then, or could it translate to the other review criteria? Like, well, you could say the soil scientists they hire may or may not be objective. The engineers they hire may or may not be objective. And so I agree with everything, that you said, but I'm a little concerned that we're like applying it in a particular way here, and in a particular way that hasn't demonstrated to me that's very useful. Anyway, thanks. What do you think, Josh?
I think that's a fair question, a fair issue to talk about. I guess if I was the developer, I'd want to be hiring the appraiser. If I'm here representing the city, I want the city to hire the appraiser. I mean, what do you want me to say? I know that you can influence the outcome.
And maybe appraisal is different than like a soils assessment or some of the other assessments that are done. I'm not sure.
Can I offer just a thought related to that, or I'm also glad to not, if that's not appropriate.
Go.
No, you can respond.
Yeah, so I think that is a fair assessment and a fair question. I think, like Josh said, an appraisal is a bit of, or a fair market value is a bit of a spectrum, and it's got sideboards, and it should be demonstrated by defensible data. But whereas, an engineering schematic or a soil sample is more hard science, and that doesn't necessarily address your question. But I think that appraisals have a lot of flexibility in their adjustments. If you've ever looked at an appraisal, there's adjustments for timing and size and river frontage and all kinds of different factors. And that's not anything that we're going to really address, and nor should we. That's not our job. But I think that there's a bit more of an art there than an engineering plan. And again, that doesn't answer your question.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Shane, I see your hand, and then Dave, then Andy.
Yeah, I guess I just wondered if we just left the language generally status quo and we left the appraisals up to the developer, it feels like what needs to happen is that there could be a challenge, like there is a way to challenge it from the city's perspective with a counter appraisal done by somebody that's hired by the city at that point. I don't know, was that explored at all? And yeah, it feels like that's what we're up against here, is like you guys have gotten low appraisals, and they don't pass the sniff test, but they pass the letter of the intent. And I wondered if there was a way to challenge it. Yes.
To answer that question, if I may, that was our original proposal, and the sort of the methodology we were originally going to take. We got pushback from various folks, and so what we wanted to avoid was instances in which the city had the ability or any sort of just incentive, even almost, to challenge these appraisals. That's what was happening in the past. It wasn't necessarily explicitly part of the language, but that's what we were finding was, these appraisals were submitted and the city was challenging them based on some of this ambiguous language. And we wanted to avoid that, because that's where the efficiency was lost immediately. There was back and forth. There was bringing in the mayor and city leadership and city council and probably some of you guys and Parks Board. And so what we thought was we would, again, go through this very transparent process. I understand the economic perception bias in that, whoever's hiring the appraiser. I like to think these guys and gals are independent and above board in their judgment and their professional output. But I think the idea, and again, this is, we can debate this, but the idea is that we keep that in the city. We're in communication with the developer and the appraiser, and it all stays sort of in-house, if you will. And we're not trying to tell the appraiser how to do their job. It's just that we don't want to create scenarios in the language where the city just challenges everything, because that doesn't work either. But to answer your question, Shane, we did certainly look at that option.
Thank you, Grant. Okay, Dave. Dave, you're muted.
There we go. Sorry about that. Okay, where was I? I think the original intent of what the city was proposing here, at first I was worried about the second scenario, if you will, and I think it works. And not only that, there's two choices, and the last word after the first choice is "and," which means the other one is also available. Given that, and the language about what the city, what I'm trying to focus in on is, what is the city's role in this? What is the city's job? This is a city process. So I think it is appropriate that the city has a process for the appraisers and avoiding instant conflict. And this is a city process, so I support their job in running it, if you will. So I'm in support for that reason. Thank you.
Thanks, Dave. Andy?
Yeah, I'll be brief. I think we're just kind of circling around some of the same principal arguments, but I think it's sort of disheartening to hear we trust the professionals, But if we trusted them, then we wouldn't be trying to really reverse the role. We're not changing the process, we're reversing the role. So really what that tells me is we're saying we really don't trust them. So it's also frustrating to me that this was presented as sort of, it's here for cleanup, ambiguities. It's really trying to get power. It's a power move. And that's substantial to me when we do a power shift, and this is a power shift. So I think that's disappointing. The final thing to this is, as I understand, there is a process to appeal an appraisal. There is an appeal to an appraisal. It's a formalized process. So if the city didn't like it, all they've got to do is throw the card on the table and say, we're appealing this. I believe there's an appeal process to an appraisal. We went back to the issue of efficiency and all these people getting drug in. Where in this process does it get stopped when the developer doesn't like the city's price and wants to appeal to that same council, mayor, all the same people? We're just changing the role of power here. We're not changing the process. So that's all I've got. So I guess as soon as we vote, the better for me. But
That's actually a good point and a question I have. Is there a formalized process for the developer to appeal the appraisal? Will it just reverse essentially?
There isn't an explicit avenue for a developer in this language to challenge the appraisal.
Okay. Neva, I see your hands raised.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that before we vote, I can see this both ways. It's, and I actually find these questions fascinating because there are two sides or more here. And I'm going to take advantage of this rare opportunity to vote with Andy because I can see it both ways. So I'm just putting that out.
Thank you, Neva. Any other points of discussion? If not, we'll call for a vote.
Yes.
Go ahead, Josh, and then Sean.
Sorry, I didn't raise my hand. It is concerning to me that there's no recourse for the developer. That's a good point that Andy brings up. And I don't know, I'd like to hear thoughts from other folks on that about how we could maybe remedy that issue.
Sean, did you want to jump in, or is it
Yeah,
related
please.
to? Yeah.
Thank you, Caroline. So I agree with that as well. The fact that there's not a process for the developers, and that if once there is, we just create the same thing that's already going on, possibly. And I guess I was kind of, I don't know, just trying to think about a way to, I don't know, create the process so that the developer also gets to be like, like maybe the city's like, here's the folks we would prefer to work with. Can you pick one? Is there any way that they can work together a little bit more on this and make it go forward? And maybe Andy's got ideas about this, but it seems like there's a crunch in the system that we're trying to work out. And, maybe a little bit of coordination between the two and appraisers is a way to get at that. And I don't know what the best option for that is, but, I don't know that we're doing ourselves a lot of favors here with this proposal.
Sean, you're cutting out a little bit at the end, but I think we got it. And I see Mary's hand up. I have a feeling she's going to set us straight on a few of our questions.
No promises there. This is Mary McCrae with Permits and Land Use Division for CPDI Development Services. The option, it's not exactly an appeal option, but the cash in lieu goes to City Council. And if the developer was opposed to the appraisal, they could bring that amount up with council, and council could make an amendment to that. They could essentially appeal to council.
Thank you, Mary. Andy, I see your hand is up.
Yeah, I guess one final thing. Many times when it gets that far in the process, that dies cast. I mean, that's not the right time to be making that debate. It's more of a staff level. I think the clearer option here is a vote of no tonight and send this back for a real discussion about changing of a process, because all we're doing is changing the roles. And so, and my concern is if we just change the roles, the motivation or the impetus to come back and really revise this process and really focus on this process, we don't see that again. That never comes back. Once we get the role in our favor, the city favor, if you will, you won't see that. We won't see this back on the docket. So that's all I've got.
Okay, thank you. Shane, I see your hands up.
I just wanted to go on the record and say that I agree with Andy for all the reasons that he just stated. And I will be voting no because I don't think that it helps the process. I'm concerned about point B, and I think it does need a thorough review to actually iron things out.
Call the question.
Okay, all right. Well, I'll just say for the record, I think I will also be voting no on this. It is tricky. It's an ambiguous process, as Josh was mentioning. It's an art, not a science. But I do think there are some pretty fundamental questions that have been raised tonight that would be helpful to go back and review. So I'll also be voting no. So with that, Donna, will you do a voice vote for this?
Certainly. Andy Mefford.
No.
Andy Mefford votes no. Sean McCoy.
No.
Sean McCoy votes no. Dave Loomis.
Yes.
Dave Loomis votes yes. Jim Bashand.
Yes.
Jim Bashand votes yes. Neva Hassanen.
No.
Neva Hassanen votes no. Toon Pham.
Yes.
Toon Pham votes yes. Josh Schrader.
Yes.
Josh Schrader votes yes. Shane Morrissey.
No.
Shane Morrissey votes no. Caroline Lauer.
No.
Caroline Lauer votes no. The motion fails. Thank you. The vote is 4 yeses, 5 noes.
Thank you, Donna. Okay, just pulling up our agenda. And just a point of clarification. So we've closed that public hearing now, correct, staff?
Correct.
Okay, thank you, Donna. Appreciate it. Okay, I don't believe there are any communications or special presentations. And I don't believe any of the committees have met. Is that correct, Shane? You would be the only committee member.
That is correct.
Okay, great. As far as old business, we have Josh's memo that was included in the packet on US Highway 93 follow-up. Josh, I wasn't sure if there was anything you wanted to offer expanding on that memo. Anything you'd like to offer for tonight?
Thanks, Caroline. I don't think so. I just offer that up as, my observations as somebody who travels that road quite frequently, and present the data that I was able to track down from the Department of Transportation. And, I feel it's a good start, and maybe, forms the basis for us to request a presentation by the Department of Transportation to address some of those concerns, possibly.
Well, thank you for writing that up. I thought it was very helpful to read through and very clear. Are there any questions from other planning board members for Josh?
Yeah, just a clarification. Yeah, I found it really helpful as well. Did you submit that anywhere, Josh, or was it more just for our information with the hopes of advancing the discussion, like as you said, to maybe present it more formally to the city at some point?
Yeah, I guess my understanding from our last meeting was that I should, go away and think a little bit about why I feel, that section of road is so dangerous. And so I was asked to just submit something for the agenda for the planning board for discussion. And so that was, really the motivation behind it.
Great, thanks.
Yeah, happy to add, any other observations from planning board, expand on it, modify it, however, the group feels best.
Neva, did you have a question?
Well, I'm afraid I missed that document. I'm sorry. It's the end of the semester and I'm just slammed. So I'm not sure I saw your document, Josh. But I share Josh's concern about that highway. And I'm also aware, as Tim Worley told us a few meetings ago, that Alexandra Estates is going to come back, and that is a huge transportation issue. And because it will add, like, I forget how many homes there, coming onto the highway from one access road. So, I'm all for us communicating concerns. I think the county commissioners would be a good place to start because, they're making judgments about some of these older subdivisions that we aren't even going to see. I believe this is the case. We don't have any county staff, but do you follow me? Like, so there's some subdivisions that were approved like 15 years ago that are going to add to the problem. And we as a planning board won't see them again because they were done before 2017. And so therefore, basically they can go forward once they're, and anyway, but that particular one is going to add a lot of traffic, and they are not able to meet the condition that was originally set when the subdivision was passed. Does this make sense? Am I just, you follow me? This, and it's going to be on that big, curve going down towards Lolo on the right. It's right across from the Bison.
Yeah, so that was part of the reason why I was asking my question, Eva, is I feel like a couple of meetings ago, we talked about, there was discussion about what opportunities are for the planning board to influence certain things. And I think this is a good example. I mean, there was the Grant Creek restoration thing and a letter of support. So I feel like what I heard from that was that we had the opportunity to submit a letter encouraging further follow-up, or at least highlighting these issues. And I think to your point, Eva, maybe in this case, something more formal to the county commissioners. Maybe we, I don't know if Josh, if you feel comfortable with your memo and just including that verbatim, or if you wanted to refine it more, but to raise the issue, because clearly it's a little bit out of our jurisdiction, but it's certainly a concern that we all have, it seems, or some of us certainly.
All right, thank you again, Josh, for putting that together. And I think these are the great points for follow-up to make sure that these recommendations are incorporated. Is there any new business for tonight? I don't see any on the agenda.
Well, I have a communications. Is that new business?
Yes.
Is that
Yeah,
next?
sure. We can do that for comments and from planning board members.
Yeah, just really briefly. This is my 6th year on this planning board. I have worked for 15 years to get some level of protection for agricultural land. Excuse me. Sorry to get emotional. But like the one specific change we've been able to get in Missoula County is the definition of agriculture that's specific and measurable, right? It's soil, like somebody said earlier, relative to appraisals, it's relatively measurable. And, and the legislature just took that away. And there's so many things they're taking away. And so And Senate Bill 260 is going to bankrupt the state of Montana and Missoula County. If we're going to move forward with zoning, Senate Bill 260 will bankrupt us and will stop us for years till we can't get, till we get through the courts. And it's just really disheartening. I'm sorry, I'll just say one last thing, but it's disheartening to like put all this energy in as a citizen and time. And, I'm not always right. I've learned a ton. I'm sure I'm wrong plenty times, but just to have the state just take it away from us and rip it out from underneath us, and to have people on the planning board who represent the organizations that are doing this, it's just extremely difficult as a citizen who has no financial interest in the outcomes. So I hope that those groups are really satisfied with their success, because we are screwed. Planning is done in Missoula County after this session. We're so screwed, you guys.
Lots to think about in this legislative session. Thank you for those comments, Neva. Dave, would you like to add a comment?
I would. On another topic, on a commissioner comments, is I want to congratulate the staff on the minutes. I've noticed from day one, they're really consistent and well done and right to the point. And so, I've been through other phases in the city and county, and these are the best I've seen, and they do a great job. I just want to put that out there.
Hear to that. Whenever I read the minutes, I think to myself, there is no way I was at any point this clear or concise, but Donna makes us all look good. So thank you,
Yay!
Donna.
Absolutely. Thank you, Donna.
Thank you.
Josh.
Yeah, I had a conversation with Radley Watkins, who's the new resource conservationist at the Conservation District. And one of the things that they are planning is a 310 education outreach. And I thought that it may be helpful for the board to better understand the role of the Conservation District and 310 law. And so if the group is open to that, they'd like to come and present to us at a future meeting.
I think that'd be great, Josh, if you want to coordinate, I guess, with Donna and perhaps Bailey to get that on the agenda. That would be great.
Perfect.
Jim, I see your hand is raised.
Is Grant still on?
He's in the meeting, but
so just a thought after this last motion for staff, just for consideration, that if they go back and do a rewrite or continue, you're going to take the recommendation to City Council next week. Just a couple items for consideration if you do rewrite, that as you do your RFP process, consider during RFP to ensure that your appraisers are subject matter experts related to the property in which they're doing appraisals. Sometimes that gets overlooked during the appraisal process. The other piece is you might consider reaching out to lenders in town and ask them how they do their blind process as it relates to appraisals. They, out of the mortgage crisis, they have a very defined process to ensure or to try to avoid collusion. So it's just worth talking to them. Staff consideration. Thanks.
Thanks, Jim. And Grant, if you're there, that's great. And if not, like we said, Donna will capture them in the minutes. So we've got it covered. And Josh, I saw your hand up. Was that just a relic from before?
Yeah, sorry, I forgot to take it down.
Okay, no problem. Any other comments from planning board members? All right, seeing none, I will adjourn tonight's meeting. Good to see you all and have a good night.
Great job, Carolyn. Nice last meeting.
Thanks, Jim. Appreciate it. Bye.